And really, my journey there started in South Georgia after coming from California and Alabama to Texas, stops in Orlando and at Disney, and then up to Atlanta. And hopefully, when I arrived there, there's a unique aspect about timing in life. So keep that in mind as we continue through this. And so we look at, right, the sports setting, we think of these big institutions, right? There's a lot of gaming going on at smaller universities. Now larger institutions are starting to get involved. And so what we have is, when we think of Ole Miss now, right, there's actually an image from the very first Egg Bowl, right? Mississippi State Ole Miss, in the basketball arena, the pavilion where they roll it down the screen, and so the formation of this program. So in 2018, right, they formed the Esports Club, right, which has since evolved into now actually a varsity program and a club organization. And so we talk about students and opportunity, right? The first two presidents actually, when they graduated, went and started university programs in esports. And one of them actually just got hired at the University of Maryland. So within a few years, he went from a small school, I believe in Kansas, right, to now Maryland, right, to direct these programs. So esports provides opportunity for me when I really think about that. I arrived in the fall of 2018. In 2 months, they had the very first Egg Bowl, which provided some interesting opportunities for data collection to talk about today. So when we think about the collegiate program, though, and how this is growing, right, over 100 programs now, right? They're offering scholarships, opportunities on the Ole Miss application now. They have, are you interested in esports? Right, we're going to have over 5,000 students for our freshman class, and they all have to check yes or no, are they interested in esports? There's scholarships available for that. And so for the first Egg Bowl, they actually had news coverage from Memphis, from Nashville. Right, so this is a traditional football school that's now embraced the concept of esports. And we had another Egg Bowl, right, back in person again, lowered the Jumbotron down for the Egg Bowl, right, for a live competition. And so one of the things today we'll talk about is there a difference between a live competition versus casual gameplay? Is there a difference? What do you think? You made eye contact. Yeah, don't do that. Of course, right? I mean, why is that though?
Because of the stakes involved. Life competitions usually have either side.
Could be a prize, right? It could be money, it could be scholarship, could be a new mouse, whatever the case may be. When there's pressure added to it, we're going to have a different stimulus, right? We operate as stimulus and response. And so that's a key dynamic when we look at some of the research is, think about it, is it actually an e-sport athlete? Is it a live competition? Right, and as we see this continued growth, right, why do we want to research esports and health and wellness? Well, what we can see is this trend from about 2011 continuing on to 2022, over 500 million, right, for viewership, Twitch, Discord, and different platforms. But that's a lot of people. And so if there's a lot of people watching, what else is going to be driven vertically? Yeah, that's right. That's right. The money, right? He knew where I was going with that, right? The money, kind of the show me the money aspect, right? So we see some of the large prize pools, these professional organizations, they've shifted top 10 from 2019, 2020. Right? COVID impacted some of those next few years, but that's a lot of money. Right? That's a lot of money up for grabs. So there's this growing interest. If there's a lot of money involved, and we think on the pro scene, how can we keep our athletes healthy? Well, the current environment is they just burn them to the ground, right? They just burn them out. Kind of the old 1950s football model, right? You guys are kind of familiar with that. They weren't really doing some of the periodization of loading. So I pose this question to you, to the students. Right, what makes an e-sport athlete an e-sport athlete? They made eye contact. Yeah. Yeah. Commitment? Yeah. What else? Skill level, certainly, right? We could do top 100 players. One we're missing, a big one. Periodization, a system. Back to his point earlier. Money, right? Are they making money? There's different ways we could quantify it. Are they making money? Is that how they support themselves? Do they have commitment? Do they have structure? Are they a top 100 player? Right? Because you could be a top 100 player, not win any tournaments, and not make any money. right? So if we think about this, right, what's the definition of it? Well, you'll look at some of these things we talked about. Are you a ranked player? Are you making money? Well, one of the interesting things a few years ago, the NBA 2K League expanded their second season, they got a pay bump. Right, so $35,000 they had draft picks. Now, the reason I bring this up specifically, and why it's really interesting, is they were getting paid more than the G League. Like, the G League is the developmental system. So the G League got a pay bump because the 2K League, right, was getting paid more than them, right? The NBA 2K League. And so you start to see this development there. But if you think about the Fortnite World Cup, 40 million people. Is that a lot? Is that a little? That's a lot, right? So 40 million people competed to ultimately try to win the prize money. Right? So we think about that. Right? When he won this solo tournament, won $3 million. Now he maybe won some small tournaments, but before that, you might say he's not a professional or semi-amateur, or semi-professional. Once he wins that money, right now he's professional for sure. So there's different ways we categorize this. You got to think about that for research. So we think about an esport athlete, you might think about, well, 2 to 15 hours of gameplay. You'll see these ranges depending on the different studies, the different reports that are coming out. Right? You might see high workloads, right? 40, 50, 80 hours. That's a lot. You look at exercise. Well, a lot of them now are exercise, maybe 5 or 6 days a week. There's some reports where you have teams that don't exercise. It's starting to transition. Right, but this is the image we typically associate, right, from South Park of gamers. That's not always the case, though, right? And one of the reasons I bring up this slide is we develop into the phys of everything is we also have this professional Call of Duty team, right? And I'm putting in Dr. Stamatis here to shame, right? It's a professional Call of Duty team, and they are pretty fit. This 13-year-old finished in the top 10 of that Fortnite World Cup, won a few $100,000. He's now a professional. All-girl gaming group, professional gaming. So with these images, right? What's the point I'm trying to get across? Universal, diversity, universal, right? There's not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? Gaming encompasses everything. And so if we think about this, though, right? If we look at U.S. adults. Depending on the data, you always see this range of 60 to 70% play some form of e-game, right? So that could be phone, console, personal computer. That could be solitaire, however you want to define it. So that means we have a lot of gaming. There's actually some really cool data that's come out recently where about 39% of the world play some form of e-game. But is that a lot? Why? Someone this. And you think about how many people may not have access to some of the technology. Right? So this is a lot of people. Right? So gaming is not just about gaming, there's larger impact here. So if we think about from the average US adult, we look at physical activity time, if they're getting 7 hours, right? About 4% of their week. What about the sedentary time when they're at the office? Right? We don't always consider that. Just from gaming, we say, well, they're getting 7 hours of video games in there. That's a small part of sedentary. Up to 40 hours. If we look at professional gamers, practice tournaments, streaming, right? 40 hours, like a full-time job, and a much larger chunk. Now, that makes sense when we look at that data, but we also don't think about the sedentary time for the average working adult. And we'll come back to all these points as we continue through, right? And we think about the money they make, right? On average, about 74,000. Some make as high as 17 million stream contracts. Yeah. In the wrong business for sure. So all that to say is there's money, right? There's a need for research, right? There's potential to be the first in these spaces. So why esports in the American College of Sports Medicine? She's clearly texting her phone right now. So oh no, you're good. What do you think? I'm putting you on the spot. So why esports in the American College of Sports Medicine, right? What do they have to do with video games?
Like together, well, I guess the health profession is like very adapted to like many technological advancements, including like very immersive or technology.
Yeah, so the American College of Sports Medicine, we want to help people get healthy, right? Exercise and medicine for you. What do we know about sedentary time? It's not great for our health. right? So there's a natural partnership here, but obviously anytime you see video games, you might see your parents or grandparents telling you to go outside. Right? You'll never get a scholarship game. And so there's this natural partnership. And so an article came out recently, and they put a call to action for these 4 different points, right? They're really looking at, well, what's the current literature suggesting, right? Physical activity, sedentary habits, right? Kind of the low-hanging fruit. Take a look at this. Right, the next one that really needs more is injury, sleep, nutrition, performance-enhancing drugs. What a performance-enhancing drug be? That's the one I was thinking of, Adderall, but certainly caffeine. Adderall. I had a grad student, he wanted to pilot a program looking at alcohol and esports. And you kind of first taken back a step, but he felt like he played better if he had a drink. But if you think about it, maybe it's not the craziest thing because rifle, right? We have a rifle team, right? You're tested for beta blockers and alcohol with rifle to reduce tremors. So maybe not as wild as you think, but you can kind of see is now they're saying, well, we need to really explore these health issues. We need to get into what's going on when we're gaming. Really, how can we counteract them? And so one of the first projects we did, and one of my grad students looked at, is casual gameplay. Right? So we said, well, there's a difference between casual gameplay and competition. Right? So casual gameplay, these individuals play Fortnite, about 3 hours. They were sent home with heart rate monitors. Saw average peaks of about 120 beats per minute for a heart rate. That's a pretty good increase, right? So it's greater than it, but just at rest. And so we can see that kind of this real world setting. We also looked at exercise hours, gaming hours, just to try to build a database, right? What is the average collegiate student look like in games? Now, a project that came out recently from Kramer. Anyone familiar with Kramer? Ohio State? What's he known for? Resistance training, right? Yeah, Ohio State now. And so he wanted to look at the endocrine response in Overwatch gamers, right? He had the room set up, they played for 30 minutes. He also looked at the heart rate. So it was really unique beyond being published in JSPR. Was he trying to quantify looking at low skill and high skill? So I think it's your point, right? You said ranking skill level. Would it elicit a different response? And at least in this casual gameplay setting, right? Not listed as 131 to 138 for the max heart rate observed. That's not a huge difference, but what's everyone's heart rate right now? We're seeing. You're seeing. Yeah, 60 to 80 probably, right? 60 to 80. So pretty similar, right? We can see this increase, right, in the heart rate. So what about now if we put it in a competitive environment? Right? So the very first A Bowl, right, we conducted, we had heart rate monitors on the Ole Miss team, right? The average peak we would see right up here, 188 beats per minute. My goodness. But if you run a maximal cardiovascular stress test, what kind of heart rate response will we see? You might hit 180, 190, 200, right? And you've done the beat test, the pacer test, one in soccer a little bit, right? You'll see the heart rates over 200. Now this is sympathetically driven, right? They're just sitting there. Now, we go back to the ACSM and health. One of the individuals in that study, we had several actually went over 200. So what's our first thought? Panic, right? We just broke new equipment. We expected elevated heart rate, but not quite like that. So when we saw that, and this individual got in the lab, involved in the lab later, he had these high heart rates. One of his parents is actually a medical professional, scheduled an appointment with a cardiologist. Because of this tournament, he then went and saw the cardiologist, was diagnosed with sinus tachycardia, where he's at, which is really a fascinating thing. So what we noticed though is this is a much greater heart rate response in a competitive environment than a non-competitive. All right, so is that important to distinguish in research? And yes, why? Your phone a friend. That's a bad reference, right? I think only a few people might get it. Right, so some of these papers are saying esports, but it's casual gaming. Right, is that really esports? And then they play a video game, right? It doesn't have the same stress response, right? The same physics. So So what's interesting is one of these groups in kind of took that idea, right? So they took that idea and they looked at player versus computer, PvP, and player versus player. So again, more of a casual setting, but these are professional gamers in a fighting video game, right? They're playing Street Fighter. Not Street Fighter 2, right? Maybe it's older folks know, but it's an updated one. And what they observed, right, is these different heart rate responses from baseline, a computer, and a player. And it went on for them to suggest that you're going to have a different autonomic response, right, depending on, is there interpersonal interaction, right? So there's something about that dynamic of competition, which inherently in traditional sports we all know. Right? So then if we start thinking about this, an awesome project they were able to do is, well, if our heart rate's elevated, what's going on? Is there higher energy expenditure, right? There's anecdotal evidence of these grandmaster chess players losing, 15 pounds over a weekend tournament, right? So a combination of these elevated heart rates, certainly the stress response. The other factors are really just not easy for 3 days, right? They're just so locked in playing chess. And so what this group did is actually they looked at, all right, heart rate elevated, but not related to energy expenditure, right? So this increase, now they did this compared, right, to exercise. So is anyone in here surprised that the speed in playing a video game does not have the same energy expenditure as being on a cyclotometer? No, hopefully everyone shakes their head no, right? But it's still a really interesting idea because if you have this elevated heart rate and you have these responses, well, what's going on in terms of the caloric expenditure, right? Because we're thinking about sedentary time, right? So then the next project looked at this concept of energy expenditure within esports. Right? They also looked at respiratory rate as well. And really, what they started to see is compared to just sitting, right? So maybe it's a little bit better designed. Compared to just sitting, it had a higher energy expenditure, right? Because it makes sense if we're cycling, we're not going to have the same energy expenditure as sitting. But they saw higher energy expenditure compared to just sitting, right? And they also go on to suggest this APM, right? Actions per minute. This amount of mouse movements, keyboard movements, right? We have a higher APM because that also leads to higher energy expenditure. Right, so then another looking at the energy expenditure, but again, they were great in quantifying amateur esports. Amateur esports, because those last two were in a lab controlled setting. So could the energy expenditure be different in competition? Potentially, right? No one's done that yet. Someone in this room could be the first, right? Kind of here with, yeah, could be you, right? Which would be fantastic. And so what they looked at is really what extent do we see changes in this energy expenditure, right? Within a 30-minute session. Right, they also look at cortisol, right? Cortisol is a stress response hormone, right? We also look at a lot of times exercise or caloric deficit. And really, they didn't see any response there, right? So in this standard amateur setting, they didn't see any cortisol response. You think that would also be the case in a competition? I don't know the answer. I'm posing that question, right? There's no data out there yet. Right, you see some anecdotal stuff, but right, so you can collect data to look at that response, right? How does hydration impact it? How does meal timing impact it? All those things related to cortisol, but right, it hasn't really been done. So if we start thinking about meal timing in that aspect, talk about some of the performance enhancing. What about supplements and nutrition? Are there esports specific supplements? Do you know of any? Adderall? You need a prescription for that. G Fuel, right? G Fuel is a big one. Any others? I mean, coffee could be, right? But not necessarily certain areas of caffeine, right? But we start thinking about it. The market's been flooded with different esports specific products, right? Of course, G Fuel, right? Because the phase plan, right, it's selling it, it's using it. Well, obviously, I need to. Kind of interesting. You guys said G Fuel. You ever look at the label on it? It's really just the same as like pre-workout, and all they did was just rebrand. Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah, not much changes, right? I mean, you'll have probably 3 grams of beta-alanine in there, you'll paresthesis going. There's not a lot of research in this space though, right? There's a few projects now that are coming out with caffeine, right? But again, there's opportunity where, Bang Energy was trying to make a push in that space, although they're having some issues now. But, so if we think about this, of course, everyone goes right to caffeine, right to caffeine. And so a project that was completed 2 years ago, right, 3 milligrams per kg of body weight of caffeine, right? So if you're 100 kilos, right, you just got 300 milligrams. How much is in a monster? Monster Energy. About 150? Yeah. That's like you're 100 kilos and 220 pounds, right? Just chugging 2 monsters. And so what they did is they looked at the different accuracy and reaction tests, right? And what we can kind of see, and you can see it in the back, right? Orange is the caffeine, blue is the placebo here. So if we look at the accuracy, right, they're able to kind of maintain. Right? It was slightly higher even at baseline when they did caffeine versus not. So based on this initial project, right, it's suggesting caffeine can help. Caffeine can help. Right, it's a shorter window, right? A shorter window of data collection. So what about something like if you're gaming for 8 hours as opposed to 2? When would you consume caffeine? All the time, just constantly, right? An IV right in. That's what I need is an IV right in. Right? So is anyone gaming here, first of all? Right? Do you have caffeine? Do you have caffeine in the game? Have caffeine. Regardless, right? Right? So generally, if you consume caffeine, you see peak plasma caffeine levels, about 45 minutes to an hour most of the research, right? And fairly short half-life. So for gaming, right, maybe we do it before an hour. And then how do we time this dose out? Well, that hasn't been looked at. Right? It's been looked at in some cognitive tests, but hasn't been applied to esports yet. Right? So there's opportunity for students. Right? So then Rose's group actually looked at the idea of glucose in games, right? Impact of glucose levels in games. Notice there's games, right? Not esports. So what they did is actually have the individual with 10, jump into the lab, get a baseline, get a standard meal, 1 hour seated, 53, 30 post-minute measures. So has anyone heard of A0 or O? What's that? I've never heard of A0. What's those? Describe it for me. Yeah. What esport is it associated with a lot of warm-up skills? Something like this. Overwatch, a lot of Overwatch guys use it as a warm-up. They have these different beat maps, these rhythms, these spin, switch, and drag. Right? Aim Hero is just like Aim Lab, Aim Hero. I got a video later, you'll see of it. It's just a specific task, right? A lab control, right? Because we could do a Stroop test, use Power London, all these different measures, but can we not try to make something specific, right? 2 games. So they did each of those for 30 minutes, right? And surprise, surprise, right? The time they actually had a meal in blue, they were fed, glucose levels spiked up, and then slowly kind of declined down. Right? If we look at the actual glucose levels during that 1 hour of gaming, that slowly declined down, still within normal levels. But if we think about this from the aim task, right, the aim zero, right, the accuracy, time trial, simple reflex, target appears, you click the wrist, and try to hit it. Right, there's no real difference, right, in the data looking at it. Now, maybe a slight trend, but really no statistical difference. Now, again, we think this project's only an hour. What if we extend this out and we only for 3 or 4 hours? Right, and that has a difference. It's an opportunity for students. But what's interesting is if you think about practical application, right? I know in scientific realm sometimes how we don't ever bring that up, but 79% or 77.34, right? From 4th through 8th place in the CSGO tournament. Here's the prize difference from 1st and 8th in the Fortnite World Cup 2 years ago. So that 1.6% difference could be difference between $3 million and I'll settle for 400,000, right? I'll struggle through. So there's some interesting dynamics there where you could extend out looking at glucose and data, right? But if we think of ACSM and esports, and it's all encompassing, right? You think about when they're often sedentary, right? You think about the mental health aspect, right? Nutrition, little exercise. Right, there was some data that's come out recently during the COVID shutdown. Avid gamers actually handled the shutdown better than the average individual. Right, and the joke is, well, gamers have been locked inside for years, we've been prepared. But we can think about screen time and the impact there, right? And personally, for me, gaming, I started during my PhD at Baylor, besides Super Mario when I was a kid, but it was really the social outlet to stay in touch with my friends from undergraduate, my old roommate. Right, that's when you start noticing changes in heart rate and shaking hands. So really, if we think about, well, what are these effects of prolonged screen time? What are these effects? Are they going to be positive? Are they going to be negative? What can we do? We know if they're logging 40, 50, 60 hours, what does that look like? The Leeds group looked at this and 50 collegiate students who haven't gamed for 4 hours. It's a pretty good duration standard, right? Which is awesome. That's more realistic for what individuals do if they're gaming Friday or Saturday night. As a casual gamer, professionals, right? 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. So they use some perceptual scales here to look at physical symptoms, right? Really what they're getting at is physical discomfort and ocular discomfort, right? So from the start to the end, after sitting for 4 hours, are you guys surprised there was some discomfort? No, right after today, there's probably some discomfort to stay so much, right? We're on a plane for 4 hours, right? Same thing, you look at ocular discomfort, right? That increases over 4 hours. What if we extend that out to 8 hours? Right? Is that trend going to continue? Certainly would increase, right? So if you're interested in athletic training, you can do FMS screening in esports, functional movement screening in esports. So all of this to look at, well, there's discomfort, there's tired, something needs to be done. 4 hours. But we can also look at these perceptual scales, well, not just ocular, but mental fatigue, right? So in the actual competition bout, in the shortest 30 minutes, right, you see this increase from 1 on mental fatigue, almost up to 4, almost a 4-fold increase. And that's with perceptual scales. And that 30-minute bout, if you have these repeated bouts, what impact does that have? At these chronic training loads, what impact does that have? What we can see is, well, if we find other ways to measure, well, Alex showed you guys earlier the new heat headset, right? Essentially looking at different brain waves, right? We use visual analog scales and mental fatigue scales, right? A little bit of a cheaper option. But if we think also, what impact does a sedentary lifestyle have, right? So America's group was calling out, well, overuse injury. What was overuse esport injury? Carpal tunnel in the wrist. What other joint? Sleep deprivation? Yeah, potentially, right? Neck pain, back pain are some of the common ones as well. Right? Vision problems, right? Tightness in joints and muscle pain. There's a lot of issues going on. It really means to me the health and wellness side to get more involved. So what are the sedentary time we think of? Well, how long do they spend sedentary compared to college students? That's an area that can be explored. Is it greater, is it less, or are they really that different? Like how much physical activity do they get? Most projects now, if you read any of the esports literature on the health and wellness side, they're collecting subjective data. And sometimes actually just using step counters, pedometers, but like physical activity, how much do they participate in? Does it impact health and fitness? And really, how do we encourage this participation without interfering with gameplay? So if you just go into the gym, it's your forearm, wrist, extensors and flexors day, right? That's Tuesday, Thursday for me. But what impact would that have on keyboard? Right? So that's one of the concerns of a lot of gamers is they don't want it to impact their actual training. Now, what's interesting though is this paper that came out a few years ago from Terry's group, right? 56% of those professional or elite gamers, meaning they compete in some tournaments that have prize pools, activity improves their performance, right? They really believe that. The interesting part is 70% of them at that time were designing their own program. So to me, that sounds like a job opportunity, right? If you heard exercise science, strength conditioning, athletic training, right? You could actually do program design stuff. There's opportunities there. Right? Only a small portion will even do anything. An interesting one that also came up, professional league of legends players, right? From Thomas's group, who's a sports dietitian with UCLA basketball. And so they looked at, right, cortisol response in the simulated League of Legends one, but the aspect I took from it, right, is these individuals, they just didn't have any nutritional knowledge. So here's 9 professionals living in LA. And they don't even think about nutrition as much, and they don't think how much it could really have an impact on their careers, right? How could it extend it? What is it doing to our body? So there's a lot of avenues here. So if we look at America's, right, we look at reporting of esport athletes getting significantly less steps per day compared to the average individual. All right, does anyone know how many steps a day they get? 3 steps? Your watch tell you? Otherwise, I have no idea, right? No idea what my step count would be. So it's an interesting way to look at it, but at least in the collegiate esports, right? 40% of them don't participate. But I look at that as, well, 60% do. Right? I see that kind of as a positive. And you get them to be physically active. And so a project actually came out of not a huge group here, I think New York Institute of Technology. What's really neat is they looked at BMI, they looked at body fat, they looked at doing this on a DEXA. They can also get bone mineral density. Right? And what they observed is 20 to 25, is that how would you classify that as BMI? You made eye contact. Yeah. What do we say? It's underweight, normal, or overweight? Normal, right? So classified as normal, but then we see like higher body fat percent. Not quite to the extreme, right? There's a lot of push now through AHA looking at kind of skinny fat concept. It sounds silly, but yeah. But then they also looked at the bone mineral concept, right? What they observed was in the control group much higher compared to the esports group. Now, they suggested due to physical activity, non-weight bearing activity. I certainly agree with that. I'd say we need more data in this, right? Because do you remember that image I showed you and I said, what's an esport athlete? And then we continued on and we saw all these images of different people, right? Gaming in general, there's so many individuals involved. We got to continue to build that. But I don't doubt that by any means, non-weight bearing, you're going to have lower bone mineral density. Right? We know if you have older cyclists, right? There's data that looks at cyclists in the 50s, right? They may, cardiovascular health may be phenomenal. Their bone mineral density is often not great. Why is that? Weight bearing, right? Resistance training, weight bearing, they're seated. Yeah, they don't have that same stimulus. So based on this, they're saying, well, they're at greater risk for injury compared to a normal individual. Anyone who's sedentary, right? High sedentary time certainly would. But we were talking about this last night at dinner. What's the long-term outcome for games? Is there any data on that yet? Why not? Yeah, it's still new. We're still young, right? Still young. I'm throwing myself in there. I'm probably not, right? But right, so 30, 40, 50 years from now, it'd be phenomenal. A project I would love to see if there's anyone interested in, get an older gaming group, right? 65 plus, they just retired. I was listening to a health economist the other day on a podcast. What happens when someone retires, right? They lose that cognitive stimulus. There tends to be this decline, right? Once they can find something to fill it. Could gaming be that option? Maybe not for my parents. They don't like video games, right? They're in their 70s. But for you, right, as you continue to age, certainly. So what Donnie's group did next is really neat. It's the first project. So now let's put physical activity into a gaming intervention. Right? So Adam games, right, 60 to 75 minutes. It would then either have a 6-minute walk, right, or a supine rest, right, or they would just continue gaming all the way through. And what they observed was it didn't really impact the gaming performance. It didn't impact it in this paradigm. It did not impact. Although continuous play was slightly better than rest. So at the very least, look, you were able to break up gaming and get to physical activity. Right? So the target was putting physical activity and gaming together. There are a couple angles. Maybe potentially they could play better, right? 2 hours, maybe we drag this out to 8 hours, maybe the intervention time points are different. Maybe potentially you play better. Oh, by the way, you've met physical activity requirements, you've reduced your risk for cardiovascular disease, right? That's kind of the end goal. And we think about what was that number at the beginning of how many U.S. adults are taking? It is 64%, right? So if you're going to play words with friends and you really want to beat your cousin, well, I'm going to go for a walk first, right? You know, there's a lot of positive benefits, cognitive benefits for aerobic activity and lower body weight bearing activity. So how do we monitor training load in traditional athletes? Because we're going to do esports, right? Where do we start to monitor the load? So you think traditional, right? Maybe you're doing neurocognitive trainers, visual trainers, right? Could that be an avenue? Right? Could it be like this perch device up here for bar velocity, like that we do in the Olympic weight complex? Could we look at these positive pressure and gravity treadmills, right, for distance runners, right? So we can't really use those models. So what could we do, right? So can we use performance measures we see in research, right? So what you'll see is a lot of these group tests, reaction tests, which a lot of great validation behind them. So could we maybe try to be a little bit more applied in some sense, right? So we're looking at game-specific measures. So what's the problem if we just look at action per minute, accuracy, KD, total score? What's the challenge? We see this in traditional sports too. You keep making eye contact. I'm sorry. What's your name? Nick. Nick. You actually want to say something, Nick.
I mean, I guess the problem is that it's not any
Well, certainly that, right? Let's say we put an intervention in. If you play a match right now, is there any guarantee the competition will be the same when you play the next one? There is, right? So that makes it tough because now with the exercise intervention, if we have that player versus player stimulus, which we want, is it because you played against lower competition or is it because the intervention is different? So could we add in some standard platforms like those aim trainers, right? So we could have them game, so we have the in-game performance. And now we can have a standard aim tap or beat map, right? It's kind of the standard lab control. We have the applied setting, now we have this lab control. The best of both worlds, hopefully. Right? So aim lab, what you see is these targets come up, right? You can even pick the gun that you're using in this first-person shooter. And what's neat is aim lab will actually give you these metrics, like precision, skill with perspective, right? Accuracy, reaction time. Right? Which you see a lot of these typical reaction time tests might be quick as soon as the color changes, right? Now we have this very performance-specific metric, right? But so how could we monitor it, right? So these physiological responses, as you mentioned. So we can look at eye tracks, right? Alex did a great presentation on that, non-invasive, really. And what if we thought about HRV or resting and post-heart rate, right? The heart's not a metronome, but you're sitting here 60 beats per minute, it's not a beat every second, right? There's variability in that. They use that a lot in traditional sport models for kind of readiness, right, or absence of beat. We look at perceptual scales. Well, there's some good data there. Right? Good data there, but it doesn't really tell us if there's going on in the body, but we can look at blood markers like glucose, cortisol, epinephrine, all these potential markers. But those are a little more invasive. So ultimately what our lab group decided, two grad students kind of piloting out this system with Curia is looking at eye tracking, right? And test out some of the use devices. And so what you have is the two monitors that Alex was showing where we can actually screen record. And we set this with the monitors up, but kind of early setting it up and piloting. So what this looks like, right, is we have someone who's really kind of a non-gamer, right, going through the standard aim test. Right? Targets come up, they disappear, you have certain times, gives you all these different scores. And all these same metrics Alex was showing earlier. But what if we look at this as someone who's much better at gaming a real game scenario? So what we have going on here, this blue circle is where they're looking, the graph's looking, right? You have the pupil size we showed earlier, these fixation patterns, use data down below. But now we can start to look at, well, what's going on in the pupils as they're gaming for these continuous durations, right? Are there changes? Are there shifts? So why would we want to know that, right? If we see drastic changes, what does that tell us? you're alert, or maybe you're fatigued, right? Something's going on. Maybe now we know when you should take a break, right? So based on that, I'll be presenting next week. Right, we had these individuals gaming for 3 hours, right at that 2 hour, 2 hour 15 mark, this window, we started to see these shifts in pupil size. We saw these shifts. So now for us, we're looking at this window of, okay, can we put an exercise or nutrition intervention? Because now we have data to show, look, you should take a break based on this response. And maybe eventually we're able to correlate it with perception scales because equipment's expensive. But now we can make an argument to get gamers to be active, right? Beyond just, well, the phase plan does it, so I'm going to do it. And I'm also going to do their stuff. So the project we just started now, we have individuals gaming for something that lasts 6.5 hours. That's a long time to game. They're getting a meal when they first come in. They're getting exercise halfway through, right? They're getting paid to work. It's a long time to game. Although I'll say this, the Esports group to work with, recruit from, has been fantastic. Like they do not complain about coming in to play video games for several hours. So that's the next step for our lab. But what about for you guys, for ACSM, and all these different ideas, right? And really what I want you to think about as students, if you're looking at getting involved or doing a project, is competition, right, versus casual gameplay versus training. Right? All these are different scenarios. And if it's a competitive environment, well, that's different than casual gameplay. The casual gameplay is important, especially if we extend out that duration, right? Because if we're playing for several hours or sedentary, we know that's not a great thing. Right? We can look at exercise modalities. There's resistance training or high intensity interval training, the Tabata style, which is what we're doing for the current project, is exercise snacks, which isn't eating while we exercise, right? Short bursts of high intensity exercise, right? So we're getting our heart rate up to about 80%, right, during these quick bouts. And so we can look at supplements, nutrition, recovery, training load, right? Could you use morning HRV scores and look at some of these things? And so the final thought is, how does esports fit across campus? I know this is ACSM, but to me, esports is bigger than just one area, right? How can all this connect? Well, psychology, right? Mental health issues. Are there positive interactions between physical activity and mental health? Yeah, right? So you could build a collaborative network for that. You want to look at engineering, some of these secret lab chairs, which are about $600, by the way, not very comfortable, right? You could be analyzing, right, body discomfort, right, stress on the spine. How does that impact our breathing dynamics if we're in extreme hip flexion, lumbar flexion, right? How does that impact our diaphragm? You could look at event management. How does the temperature impact your physiology, right? I had a gamer that worked in my lab, semi-professional, paid his college tuition with weekend gaming tournaments. He would stick his hands in warm water before gaming. Why would he do that? Vasodilating the hands, right? Those arenas are cold, right? And they're cold because the computers need it to be. Right? So you could look at that space. You could look at, there's actually an FDA-approved game now in medicine health looking at ADHD treatment, which is fascinating. So how does all that interact? So nutrition, of course. Esports in the law. Well, none of us are legal studies. But could there be lawsuits for gaming coming up related to health outcomes? Yeah, there definitely can be. And you know who they're looking for in those trials? Expert witnesses. Right? You publish research in that space, maybe you get a graduate degree, right? You could be a consultant within that, right? On when there should be these scheduled breaks, these physical activity breaks. So currently, they're just burning the athletes out and they hit 20 every time, right? So there's a lot of unique avenues as you're a student. What can I do with this? Right? Really, however creative you can be. Right? And kind of the final thought is on this education space. Well, it's an anatomized table, interactive physiology. So what Hannah's doing is adjusting heart rate, respiratory rate to see how this all impacts the cardiovascular system. You can kind of take gamification into education to new trends, right, which is really exciting. So lastly, I'll thank my graduate students that were kind of around for a lot of the project talk today. Just hanging out at different conferences. If you haven't ever been to a Buc-ee's down in the South, it's a gas station on steroids, like you wouldn't believe. 200 pumps, if you need a deer stand, they have that, and they have their own deli, pastry shop. It's an experience, I'll say the least, so. And really that leads with questions, comments, donations, PIN numbers, which is my master's advisor's line. I'm gonna add Venmo in that. So this individual holding the Egg Bowl Trophy, Gunner, which is what's cool about collegiate esports, it is undergrad enrollment, part of the University of Mississippi Medical College, he's in the dental program. Because he's still part of the university system, he's still able to compete on the Overwatch team. Tanner here is in our sport analytics program, graduate program, and then Abbott is in first year medical student, still competing in Overwatch. How they find time, I don't know, they're high achievers, but it's pretty phenomenal. So with that, I appreciate and welcome any all questions. So.
Before you were talking about the differences between like competitive and regular play, I noticed that you said one of the measures was looking at their heart rate. I'm assuming when you use League of Legends as an example, if they're playing for easily 5 hours straight with like short breaks in between, how would their heart rate be able to be measured? I'm assuming it would be spiked almost the entire time.
Not spike, right? It depends on kind of the moment, right? Depends on the moment. Similar to what we saw looking at the Fortnite data, right? Pretty level, there might be some drift where it elevates. And then as they get down to the final circle, what happens? You see a spike, right? It's more of a high intense moment. Kind of like if we took a traditional sport like basketball, free throws, first quarter, not a big deal. Second quarter, fine. Fourth quarter, game on the line, NBA finals.
Thank you.
Tom, that was excellent. Thank you so much for coming. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. I have a question as I was watching your presentation. You said that in terms of energy, when you're gaming, you are expending 40% more energy. So would you consider gaming sedentary time, or would you characterize it like, would you give it a different term? Or do we need new terms for esports, maybe?
I don't know the answer to that, right? That's a good question because, right, it's elevated. We have that one study. There could be others, right? But to my knowledge, that one. And what if we extend that out over 4 hours, right? It's a 30-minute window. Is that really enough to make a precise statement? Probably not. I think it's a really cool project, right? They're the first to do that.
But it looks a different type of sedentary.
So think of it kind of like too. A lot of them, their feet are not stable, right? So they're switching their movement. So you see an increase, but they're still sitting for a while.
Yeah.
So if I had to put a statement now, I would tend towards they're still sedentary. Just a slightly higher energy.
Okay. Thank you.
An office worker. Yeah.
You mentioned that the arenas where they have most of these events are very like cool. Oh, like cold to the point where I'm not gonna phone a friend, but I'll take a 50-50. Either you could have a term paper or a lawsuit, hypothermia and esports.
I don't think it quite gets that cold.
Oh, I was wondering, that's what I was wondering. Does it get that cold? Because when you mentioned the dipping in the hand, I'm like,
No.
oh crap.
So a lot of what you'll see, it'll have the hand warmers, like you go up to the mountain, you get the little hand warmers. No, their hands get cold. It's not that cold.
Oh no, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not 30 degrees, yeah.
And sitting for 8 hours. Oh, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your Venmo account? No, I'm kidding. I was just wondering, is there a standard setup that they have in the tournaments, like in terms of like the CPU or the monitor screens?
In terms of what, the distance to the screen?
No, I mean like the I don't know, like the memory, the gigabytes, like I don't like.
That is beyond me. But yeah, they do have certain requirements for the system. Now, the monitors we use are all 120 hertz, right? So if they don't refresh at a high enough rate, it's a problem for the gamers. It's not a smooth play. But yeah, they have some really high